is there some sense, can you steel man the case that this class difference is over exaggerated? That there's a difference, but it's not the difference of the abuser and the abused. It's more of a difference of people that were successful and people that were less successful.
So I'll play devil's advocate, which is that maybe one could argue that in its purest, earliest stage, capitalism was based on a stark difference. But then since then, two things have happened. One, a bunch of socialists and workers have organized to guarantee certain rights for working class people, certain protections. So then our system now, there are certain safety nets, less in the US than in other countries, but in a lot of countries are pretty extensive safety nets.
Even like 40-hour work week, minimum wage, safety regulations, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and all those things are, in my mind, doses of socialism within capitalism, because what you're doing is you are taking the autonomy of capitalists to do whatever they want with the people contracted to them. And the only thing stopping them is, them potentially being able to go to another employer. But even then, it's kind of potentially a race to the bottom. If, you can't get more than $2 an hour from any employer in your market, you're going to have to, live with it. So one factor is we have built in those protections. So we've taken enough socialism into capitalism that you could say that at a certain point, maybe it makes a qualitative difference and not just a quantitative difference in people's lives. The other thing is, over time, we've gotten wealthier and more productive as a society. So maybe at some point, the quantitative difference of just more and more wealth means that even if in the abstract, the division between a worker and a capitalist is real, if that worker is earning, $250,000 a year and has a good life and only has to clock in 35 hours a week, 30 hours a week, and has, 4 weeks of vacation, then isn't it just like an abstract or philosophical difference? So I think you could level those two arguments. What I would say is that, one, a lot of these rights that we have fought for are constantly being eroded and they're under attack, in part because the economic power that capitalists have bleeds into our political democracy as well. There's constant lobbying for all sorts of labor market deregulations and so on. I fundamentally believe that if tomorrow all those regulations went away, capitalists would fight to pay people as little as possible, and we'd be back in 19th century capitalism. And not because they're bad people, because if I'm running a firm and all of a sudden my competition is able to find a labor pool and is paying people less than me, I'm going to be undercut because they'll be able to take some of that extra savings and invest into new technology or whatever else, and they'll gobble up my market share before long. And then also beyond that, I do think there's a normative question here, which is, now, do we believe that ordinary people have a capacity to be able to make certain decisions about their work? Do we believe they know more about their work than their bosses? Now, I don't think that's not true at every level, but I think there's no doubt that in workplaces, workers know how to productively do their task in ways that their manager might not know. I think we've all been in workplaces where we've had managers who kind of don't know what you do or whatever else. And I think that collectively, if incentivized, we could have them, one, instead of hoarding or that information, since they're getting a stake in production and so on, they'd be able to more freely share it and be able to reshape how their day-to-day work happens. And also with elected managers, you kind of take that up the chain. I think you would have perfectly efficient market-based firms that could exist without capitalists.
So there's a lot of things to say. Maybe within just very, very low level question of if the workers are running the show, there's a brutal truth to the fact that some people are better, and the workers know this. This is the Steve Jobs A players. You want to have all the A players in the room. because one B player can poison the pool, because then everybody gets demotivated by like by the nature of that lack of excellence and competence. This is just to take sort of a crude devil's advocate perspective. Are the workers going to be able to remove the incompetent from the pool in the goal of towards the mission of succeeding as a collective?
So I think that any successful model of socialism that involves a market, you need two things. One is at the micro level, you need the ability to fire people and for them to exit firms, which might be a slower process in cooperative-based firms than it is in a capitalist firm without a union. But it would be probably akin to the process that would happen in a capitalist firm, of which there are many with unions. So you need that. And then at the macro level, you need firm failure. You need to avoid a dilemma that happened in Soviet-style economies, which was soft budget, constraints and firms basically not being allowed to fail because the government was committed to full employment. The firms employed people, so even inefficient firms were, at the end of the day, they knew they were going to be propped up by the government, and they would be given all the resources they would need, no matter how inefficiently they were using those resources to maintain employment. So I think you need both.
Do you worry about this idea of firing people? Man, I'm uncomfortable with the idea. I hate it, but I also know it's extremely necessary. So is there something about a collective, a socialist system that makes firing, you said it might be slower, might it become extremely slow? Too much friction. Isn't there a tension between respecting the rights of a human being and saying, like, you need to step up, maybe sort of deposit the carrot, like you really like to really encourage fellow workers know when there's a person that's not pulling their side of the doing as great of a job as they could be, but isn't the person that's not doing a great of a job going to start to manipulate the system that slows the firing in their self-interest?
Well, I think there would be so maybe another way to put it is, think about, like, if you're a partner at a law firm, right? I don't really know how law firms work, so I probably shouldn't use this analogy, but correct me if I'm wrong. But let's say you're a partner, you kind of have equity in your law firm or something beyond your billable hours. And let's say you're going to be fired from your law firm, or they're laying off people or whatever else. They could just get rid of you, but they would also have to figure out how to kind of buy you out too, after a certain point. So I think that, like, in a cooperative firm, you'd probably have a system where after a certain point of working productively, you probably have a period where you get fired really quickly, no matter what. But once your job security kicks in, you would be able to, it would be a process. It would probably be like, a day or two process to figure it out. Or maybe they would have a progressive discipline process, which is, first you have to get a verbal feedback, and then maybe a written performance review. Then you could be fired. I mean, that's how it works in a lot of workplaces with either unions or with just basic job security. In most countries, that's how it works, because there's not at will employment in most countries. So I think that the real tension is, if you fire someone, if you're condemning them to destitution, then morally you'd really feel something there, as you should, as a human being concerned about other people. But in a social system, or even basic social democratic system, there would be mechanisms to take care of that person. So one, if a firm is failing for any reason, they're getting outcompete or whatever else, those workers would then land in the hands, just for a little bit, of the state, right? And there could be active labor market policies to retrain people to go into expanding sectors. Or your sector is now obsolete, but here you have these skills. You're going to be trained, and here's some resources to kind of help you along your training. And then there's a bunch of firms hiring, so go on your way. Then also, just with an expanded welfare state, being destitute in certain countries, being unemployed in certain countries is easier than in other countries or situations. So, you still can fall back on that mechanism. And also, in my vision of a market socialism, a democratic socialism, there would be an expanded state sector. Not not anything you can imagine, but the way in which there's more of a state sector in countries like Norway or Denmark than there is in the US. So there would be, various forms of state employment and whatever else. So I mean, I think that the real question is, should being bad at your job or getting fired for any reason or getting laid off, should that be a cause to have you, totally lose your shirt? Or maybe should you just have to rebound? Maybe you have less money for consumption or whatever else, and you'll be on your way onto bigger and better things, in a few months.
So a strong social net in many ways make it more efficient to fire people who are not good at their job, because then they won't be that won't actually significantly damage their quality of life, and they have a chance to find a job at which they can flourish.
Sure.